Morning. Hi, welcome to Kings at Home Daily. My name's Steve. I'm one of the leaders based up at City West. If you're a part of the King's Church family, then morning, great to have you joining us. If you're looking from outside, we're a church based in Norwich, meet across three locations in the city normally, City Centre, City West and Mark Cross, but a bit of a mix of in-person and online meetings during this time. But we're also putting out content like this daily, each weekday, currently working our way, or should I say coming to the end of the book of Acts. And this morning we are in Acts chapter 27. So I'm going to read the whole chapter and just draw out a few points for us this morning. So find yourself Acts chapter 27. When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. We boarded a ship from Adriatim about to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. The next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to his friends so that he might provide for his needs. From there we put out to sea again and passed from the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. When we sailed across the open sea off the coast of Syria and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra and Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy and put us on board. We made slow headway for many days, and we had difficulty arriving off Cnidus. When the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed to the lee of Crete, opposite Salmon. We moved along the coast with difficulty and came to a place called Fair Havens near the town of Lasea. Much time had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous because by now it was after the Day of Atonement. So Paul warned them, "Men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo, and to our own lives also." But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and of the owner of the ship. Since the harbour was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was a harbour in Crete, facing both southwest and northwest. Verse 13. When a gentle south wind began to blow, they saw their opportunity, so they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. Before very long, a wind of a hurricane force, called the northeaster, swept down from the island. The ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind, so we gave way to it and were driven along. As we passed to the lee of a small island called Cordia, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure, so the men hoisted it aboard. Then they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together. Because they were afraid they would run aground on the sandbars of Syrtis, they lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along. We took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw cargo overboard. On the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. After they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, "Men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourself this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost, only the ship will be destroyed. Last night an angel of the God whom I belong to and whom I serve stood beside me and said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen, just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island.' On the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea when, about midnight, the sailors sensed they were approaching land. They took soundings and found that the water was 40 metres deep. A shorter time later, they took soundings again and found it was 30 metres deep. Fearing that we would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, 'Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved.' So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it drift away. Just before dawn, Paul urged them all to eat. 'For the last 14 days, he said, you have been in constant suspense and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Now I urge you, take some food. You need it to survive. Not one of you will lose a single hair from his head.' After he said this, he took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of them. Then he broke it and began to eat. They were all encouraged, and ate some food themselves. Altogether, there were 276 of us on board. When they had eaten as much as they wanted, they lightened the ship by throwing the grain into the sea. When the daylight came, they did not recognise the land, but saw a bay with a sandy beach where they decided to run a ship aground if they could. Cutting loose the anchors, they left them in the sea, and at the same time untied the ropes that held the rudder. Then they hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach. But the ship struck a sandbar and ran aground. The bow struck fast and would not move, and the stern was broken to pieces by the pounding of the surf. The soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping, but the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life and kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and get to land. The rest were to get there on planks or on pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely. Whew. Wow. Oh, 10 minutes must be up. Okay, a long chapter there, and it's funny. It's a huge amount of detail for what's really just a I say just, but a storm, a violent storm, and rescue. But and you could almost kind of think, why is there a whole chapter on this? Was Paul? It's almost though he was commissioned to write 28 chapters, and he was beginning to run out of ideas at the end, and went into a huge amount of detail here. But and also you kind of think, well, he, it's kind of a story of, well, I warned you, and it happened anyway, and then I told you so, and you could kind of think, well, why is there in this here in so much detail? But reading a commentary this morning and just thinking on it, it was a wonder. If you scratch away at the surface, there's a wonderful illustration here of how when we're sharing our faith, we're not listened to. Paul, he warned here, didn't he? He warned them in the first part of this chapter, not to do this. This is going to result in shipwreck, and he wasn't listened to, and then disaster struck. The storm in verse 13, and then you suddenly see him towards the end of this chapter being listened to, and it's interesting. It uses the word spared and saved several times in this chapter, and I think it can be an illustration for you and I when we're sharing our faith. Often we can think, well, I don't want to share my faith unless they're going to listen. Unless what's the point in sharing my faith or stepping out or being bold if they're not going to listen, if they're not going to take it seriously, if they're not going to take on board what I have to say? And yet, and just in the same way here, where Paul warned them but wasn't listened to, and yet after disaster struck and things happened, they listened to it. And I think the same can be true for us, that we shouldn't necessarily wait until we think that colleague at work, that friend, that family member, until they're ready to listen. I'm not suggesting we put this down their throat, but nonetheless, we shouldn't be afraid to speak out, even though we might not be listened to, and because God can work through that, and we don't even know what seeds are planted when we do step out and share our faith. And just want to encourage you this morning, really, that I know I find it hard, to share my faith, and it's not easy, is it? And yet it's what God calls us to, and He's with us when we do it. And we might not always be listened to, but it may well be seeds sown, and opportunities come because we stepped out when perhaps seemingly people didn't listen. And it might not be you necessarily who then sees the fruit from that, but we know that God can be working behind the scenes in unexpected ways to bring people to salvation. So, interesting story, interesting account this morning, but I trust there's some useful nuggets for you there. Bless you.